Okay, we're on and we're live. Great. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, here online and also on YouTube later on. It's indeed a great honor and a pleasure for me to introduce Winka Doubledum, founder and partner of Architectonics New York, and also at the University of Pennsylvania. She serves as Miller Professor and Chair of Weitzman Architecture and Director of the Advanced Research and Innovation Lab, ARI. My name is Tom Verabes, Professor of Architecture in the School of Architecture and Design at NYIT. And the format of the Beyond the Envelope series of events is a presentation by the architect of a particular project and other projects it might relate to, followed by a student-led interview. So I'm pleased to introduce here online Master of Architecture final year student Damini Sri Reddy, who will conduct this interview with Winka Doubledum following her presentation. So firstly, before introducing Winka Doubledum, I'd like to warmly thank Dean Perbolini for her support for this series of presentations and interviews titled Beyond the Envelope. Many thanks to David Diamond, Director of the Master of Architecture program here at New York Tech, for his support for the third year of this graduate seminar course, Beyond the Envelope, within which the series is set. The series of presentations and interviews could never be launched without the important work of our Lectures and Events Committee, especially Committee Chair Athena Papadopoulou, Alessandra Mellis, and the invaluable administrative support of Susan Sternberg. Winka Doubledum is the founder in 1994 and partner of the WBE certified firm Architectonics NYC. Widely known for their award-winning work, recognized as much for its design excellence as for the use of smart building systems and innovative structures. Architectonics had recently won the A+ award for the Asia Games 2022 Master Plan in Stadiums, the AIA Award and RTF Futures Award for the 512 GW Townhouse, and the THA Award for the Inscape Mediation Studio. Their fourth book, Strange Objects, New Solids and Massive Things, published by Actar, was launched in fall 2021. Professor Doubledum is also the chair of Weitzman Architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, where she has gathered an international network of innovative research and design professionals. Doubledum has served as the external examiner for the Bartlett UCL in London from 2018 to 2022, and was one of the creative directors of the City X exhibit in the virtual pavilion in last year's Venice Architecture Biennale. The project in focus in today's presentation and interview is Architectonics Asia Games Park for the 2022 Asia Games, completed only some months ago in Hangzhou in Zhejiang province in China. Winka Doubledum will present how this project challenges the distinction between what is natural and what is human-made, which has informed the distinction between the wild and the cultured for centuries and has become blurred. In this light, Winka asks, what is natural and what is artificial in the era of the Anthropocene? We'll hear of the rarity of the kind of untouched, idyllic beauty is becoming increasingly rare, and how we find strange beauty in the Anthropocene, unexpected side effects, and alternative symbiotic relationships occur. We'll be looking at new developing mutants in nature and in buildings and how they react to environmental stresses. Architectonics recently completed design for the 116-acre eco park in Hangzhou, China, with 7 buildings, among which 2 stadiums produce such synthetic natures and mutants. By understanding the stadium fundamentally as a hybrid structure that also functions as a concert hall or event space for Hangzhou after the games, the building transforms the park into a constantly evolving active urban participant rather than creating a static representative object that would become a white elephant after the 2-week Asian Games. Winka Doubledum will present what she understands as strange intersections occurring along the structures of double curved envelopes, where brass shingle surfaces intersect with steel and glass diagrid rings. Further, these bulges are argued not only to express the mutant character of the building, but also to add identity and character to the strange object, making recognizable that this is a neighborhood participatory social condenser. Join me, please, to warmly welcome to New York Tech, Winka Doubledum.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's great to be here. I will share the screen with you. Let's see how that goes. Oh, interesting.
Is it working?
Yeah, I just think my thing is showing too much for some. Thank you. For some reason, my Zoom seems to think it cannot see my screen.
I made you a co-host, Winka, so it shouldn't be an issue.
There we go. No, it's just, I got an iWatch and it's ruling my life now. It's decided it's taking over. Okay, here we go. Let me know whether you see it full screen.
Yes, we do.
Yeah?
No, we see your notes. The notes.
Switch.
Probably switch, yeah. Swap displays. Up on the left, yeah, the left here, swap displays probably does it. Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you for that. Let me close this so I don't. Good. Welcome, everyone. You all know offices are never the person you see alone. There is many people involved, and over the years, many scales, many subjects, many typologies involved. As you see here, we move along scales, countries, typologies, and functions. Architects' lives are interesting. We go from projects to exhibitions, which means we share our ideas and we actually talk about them. We make it an argument, maybe. And we share it in publications where we lay out our points and talk about it in depth. As Tom said, our latest book is Strange Objects, New Solids and Massive Things. We call it the anti-monograph. It really is a manual conceived itself as a strange object and reflects our non-standard. Sorry, I was interrupted, but like that was what I said. It's not a manual. It is a manual, and it reflects the non-standard way we're working. Essentially, the non-standard way started very early on and was a little bit related to what we call the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, as we know, has strange effects from tornadoes of fire to droughts to floods. So why can't we control that this water travels to countries that need it and the other way around? We think partially as architects, we have a small part where we can maybe add some intelligence to this problem, thinking about buildings with smart skins, passive energy sources, prefabricating, which means it's clean and fast, and using renewable sources. So I'll walk very quickly through some earlier projects. This was a project we developed actually in the late 90s, was built around 2000, and was maybe one of the first parametric projects where we actually, instead of construction drawings with dimensions, we sent a 3D model around with XYZ points. We did this because the glass was extruded in Spain, the mullions, the glass was folded in Spain, the mullions extruded in Hong Kong, and the whole thing was unitized in Brooklyn. Now, not only did we do that, we also felt like we wanted to challenge the original or maybe standard curtain wall notion, as this was more a customized version. And we separated the vertical and horizontal mullions in a way that on the outside, it doesn't look like grids, but like horizontal bands. This project was a very interesting one. And the last one was also passive solar. So this is a later one. Now we're moving in 2010, and this was a pixelized facade, really responding to the fact that the building is in landmark district, and it's stone, translucent stone, glass, and translucent glass, optimized towards the north street facade with this glass and stone, and towards the south, where you have the garden with very deep balconies, which provide natural shading, and also, of course, outdoor spaces, which is rare in New York City. This parametric facade started to show something which we have been doing from the beginning, also in the folded glass one, where we moved away from working directly with contractors. We started working directly with manufacturers, and that also embeds, instead of model making, we started to make one-to-one prototypes. So here we're looking actually at a one-to-one prototype of the facade in Italy, where, as you can see, the mullions are ultra thin, the stone is translucent, and the facade is a 3D pixelation. This was in response to a question of Landmark. Moving more towards the future, this is a tower we're working on right now in my hometown, Rotterdam, in Netherlands. 150-meter tower, where we start to look at the idea of sky lobbies as green lungs. But not only that, the tower itself works like a solar chimney. I don't know whether you know this, but it pulls cool air at night from the lower levels and pushes hot air out at night. And then a frit will allow the south facades to stay cool, a silver frit on the glass, and the north facades to stay transparent. So then we move into one we just finished, a little tiny guy. So here you can see the difference in scale, actually, that we happily embrace. Our office is not traditionally going from tiny to large. We actually like to switch the mini with the mega. And then this is the mini and the mega I'll end with. So this was actually a 4-story townhouse. We added 4 stories on top of it. I said to the office, this is starting to look very out of proportion. Maybe we need to add a 3rd building to create actually something completely new. And this is where the climate skin came in, which is a trellis, a solar trellis volume, really, not a facade, but a volume. Which wraps the front kind of balconies that are leftovers from the fire escape that used to be there, and then wraps all the setbacks of the new extension and also the roof terrace and the back. So in the back, as you can see here on the right, is actually a glass elevator and stairs, because this 8-story townhouse is just for one family. Here you see the front with the trellis, and that's on the right. You can see it's openable. And that opening we felt should be a transformation. So we call it feathering. It's like basically inspired by a bird wing, where if the bird flies, the feathers are completely aligned and very, very streamlined. But then as it sits down or it lands, then the feathers get spread out. So we did the same thing here. As the trellis is closed, you see here the fins move flat in space, but as it opens, it folds out. And here we're actually using an accentuator to see whether we could automate the top levels. And here you see a small close-up of how this looks for the facade, and you see the balconies. So quite beautiful is that this facade actually saves 45% energy reduction over the year, simply by opening the trellis in the winter and allowing passive solar in, and by closing it for shading in the summer and not overheating the building. So a very energy efficient method, as in not using any energy. And then if we're up in the extension, you start to see the doubling of the facade. And here I'm standing on the remnant of the fire escape that you still see on the right of the neighbor. So the right neighbor is actually more or less how our building used to look before we added this kind of towering trellis. On the top, what you see, that square window is actually meditation corner, and it looks out over Soho in Manhattan. So you can find both, actually, these buildings are on Greenwich and Spring in Manhattan. And then the beauty is, of course, of a 3D trellis that you find this room on the top, which is really a roof terrace, but very private. The weirdest thing about roof terraces in New York is they get very, very hot and they're very, very unprivate. So here we allow plants to grow over. On the left side is the little bulkhead that contains a bar and a kitchen, and has a vegetable garden on the roof. You see the little ladder going there. So it's like a little green oasis. So going back to the Anthropocene, when we look at the climate as it is now, nearly 50% of the US population, an estimated 150 million people, live in areas that don't meet federal air qualities. Particulate matter is single-handedly responsible for up to 30,000 premature deaths every year. According to the latest World Health Organization report, 8 million people die every year globally because of air pollution. It's not pretty. Now, what is interesting, and Tom mentioned this a little bit, we have been studying something that are called radical mutants. These radical mutants, we actually found when we were doing research in how nature relates to stresses in the environment. These flowers are actually a result of the 2011 earthquake in the Fukushima prefecture in Japan. And basically, radical mutants, or hopeful monsters, as they're called by geneticist Richard Goldsmith, which he relates to evolutionary biology, means that these flowers undergo fasciation or cresting, a relatively rare condition of abnormal growth in vascular plants in which the growing tip, which normally is concentrated, as you know, a flower is symmetrical typically, starts to produce this cylindrical tissue, and it's elongated in the direction of growth, creating these flattened ribbon-like crested or elaborately contorted tissues. Now, why is Richard Goldsmith calling these hopeful monsters? He does that because he realized that the mutation actually allows these flowers not only to create this very strange beauty, but also to survive this stress in the environment. And when we started to look at mutation and other circumstances, we walked into a little plant. This is actually on a trip with my students to Mexico City, where we found the Echeveria, which absorb 87% of the volatile organic matter in the air. And as you see, NASA has adopted this plant, using it for their space stations, because when they realized when they further mutate these plants, as you see on the right, they can actually drastically increase this absorption of volatile organic matter. And then, of course, this is the result of this plant that tends to come in many different colors and textures, and is actually absolutely gorgeous. So the idea that these radical mutants or hopeful monsters are starting to work with us on climate change and absorbing of volatile matter in the air was an interesting subject to us. And it came to mind when we started looking at, or actually won this competition from an invited competition from 5 competitors. We call it the proto park because we don't see the park here as a park for the Asian Games. You have to think the Asian Games are the Olympics in Asia. And essentially this 116-acre park is 1.6 kilometers, almost a mile long. And as you can see here, has 2 stadiums. Now, what there's a few interesting things we did to change the dynamics of making a stadium. As you know, a stadium is usually kind of a white elephant in the city. It is really active for a very short amount of time, causes traffic jams, massive overload on the neighborhood, but then it stops for most of the year. So we proposed to the client to actually look both at the park and the buildings as something that would have use after the games. We were, of course, a bit opportunistic here because we were interested in making more interesting buildings than just a stadium that is a bit of a one-liner, in the sense what you see on the outside is what you get on the inside. So here you see the evolution of our thinking of the park. This was designed, the master plan was designed, co-designed with Melk, a landscape architect here in New York City. On the left is what they asked. We broke kind of the rules. They asked to put the two stadiums on the bisecting road and river in the middle. We realized if you do that, then the park becomes the backyard, and we proposed to put the stadiums in the centers of each half of the parks, then allowing these to be connected by what we call a valley, a shopping valley, or the valley village, 530-meter long shopping corridor that goes under the river, now an aqueduct locally, and under the road in order to connect the two stadiums as one kind of activity network. Also, of course, because then that artery would be the activator of the park long after the Asian Games are gone. On the top, you see the field hockey stadium with a spectacular 125-meter span wing, just solar wing. And the table tennis stadium that is a hybrid as concert hall of 35,000 square meters, which is about 350,000 square feet. Here you see how this looks now. It's extremely green already. As you can see, the aqueduct is in play, and we have these long loopy pedestrian bridges going over the river and the road as well. The road, as you can see, is actually quite a large road. It's a 6-lane highway, which in China is quite normal. We're in the center of the city, but they tend to have really large roads. And the shopping valley, as you can see, has these pavilions with green roofs and solar wings that give the energy for the solar energy for the valley village, so it's always lit. Now, the park itself, we developed as an eco-landscape with bioswales. We reconfigured the wetlands that almost completely disappeared in the area, and we use only perforated pavement so that the hardening of the city around is absorbed here. The water is absorbed here and also retained for the future, so that there will be water when it's seriously dry around. And of course, because it is a park for the future, it has playgrounds, outdoor arenas, and sport fields, and all kinds of other things. And as you can see here, people are actually currently camping in it. It was quite a lovely set of social media images. If you go on the Chinese social media, it is quite hilarious to see what people are currently doing in that park. So the Valley Village retail, as I said, is extremely long. It's about 200,000 square feet. Here you see a little bit of the structure of the solar wing and as it connects to the lower pavilions. And something we used, which is another sustainable method, which is the zero earth strategy. It's kind of a very super simple method. When you excavate the wetlands, the new wetlands and the new valley village, rather than removing the earth, we leave it on the site, allowing for the parking garages not to have to be so deeply recessed. One thing I didn't say is that actually it's not just two stadiums and a valley village. There's also 2 parking garages, a visitor center and a fitness center. So it's actually 7 buildings and a park. But here, so sometimes we have up to 20-meter, 60 feet high hills. But in the hills, you'll find little skylights to allow for natural air and natural ventilation also in the parking garages, but also for the fitness centers. And here you see the whole compilation of how it's kind of an extruded view of what is going on in the park. And how it actually looks. So as you can see, it is strangely familiar or almost completely equal. It's rare in China that this happens. I've been thinking why this happens. I think one was because we proposed hybrid buildings that were for the future, so we were allowed to invest more money. And the second one was time pressure. They just didn't have time to change our drawings. They just had to build what was on the drawings, which also is very funny, is that I drew a curved, for the same lack of time, I just followed the river as it naturally went. And they actually literally built a curved aqueduct. So that was a bit of a surprise, you could imagine. And then here we're down in the Valley Village. We have not escaped the Starbucks. that has landed here already, and it is majorly used already. And now we're on the higher level where we're actually looking at the solar wing as it is starting to collect energy. It's a solar film, so it also is slightly translucent. So the stadium design, as I said, it's a field hockey stadium outdoor. We decided to make, as everything is hybrid, also this building, we made it more as a topological or topographical landscape feature by recessing the field in an oval 5 meters deep in the site where the seating is, and then tilting the landscape up around it so that at the other end it's actually flush with the path. It's a 5,000 seat arena. This ellipse in ellipse, as you can see, the roof and the arena is called, is an ancient diagram, the seat of life, which is kind of nice as a thing to know. And the building is a very simple design. We curve the arena for better viewing angles. And then the area under the arena really became the lobby, and we curved the facade with that. And then it's covered, as I said, by this enormous wing of 375 feet in one span with one truss, a very light fabric on top of it. And what is actually interesting is that rather than worrying about the structure of it, we had to worry about it not flying off. So these concrete abutments you see here are really to hold the thing in space or in the location rather than having it fly off. As I wanted mostly cables in this roof, the engineer explained to me I had to put a tension ring around it. And first instance, they said you might not want that because the ring is going from 1.5 meters to 1 meter diameter, which is 5 feet to about 3.5 feet, which sounds enormous. But then when we drew it, because it's almost 400 feet long, it turned out that was perfect in proportion. So we said, go right ahead. We love the ring. Let's do the ring. And then here you see the section. So as you can see, the building is really just located under the seating, and the curved facade is here. On the front facade, you could say the front facade, the lobby facade, the landscape folds up to the entrance. And in the back, the seating dips down 5 meters into the site. So it's quite a topological sort of intervention in the landscape. Here you see the roof at night with the lobby. And then how it sits as a landscape. So we made these kind of sloping berms around to give this thing. But as you can see here, it's completely flush, so you can easily come out. The curve is quite beautiful as the grass sits on its edges. And then here you see the little diagram of how it's made. And this another social media photo, which stunned me, because in my head, you know how you draw things, and this is interesting when you're a student, you draw things and you draw them from above, you draw them from pedestrian level, but somehow it never occurs to you how big a structure is. And it only became very apparent in this photo when you see the tiny people. In my head, these concrete things that you saw here, right? These little guys here at the foot of the wing had become kind of in my height, 6-7 feet. And as you can see here, they're incredibly much higher. So it's I look forward to going. And then on the bottom right here, you see the pedestrian bridge flying by. The other stadium is the one here in the front. It's the hybrid between concert hall and a stadium, and behind it is actually the fitness center that is connected to it underground. And you can see that why this park looked completely green in that first photo is because all the buildings that are either the fitness center parking or visitor center and the other parking are all under the landscape. So there's literally something like 1.5 meters of earth on top of it so that trees can grow. And only slivers of glass kind of are apparent at some points and hop out of the landscape. So how did we think of this shape? When we realized we wanted to make it not a singular shape, but something more mutant that reacted to the stresses of the environment and the stresses of having to be a hybrid, We of course were kind of inspired by the flowers and the changing of the essence of the shape. But we also looked a little bit at this thing called the chong, and the chong is an artifact that you find in ancient graves that is traditionally revered as kind of quite important. So we started literally with looking at a square shape intersecting with an oval, but then we realized we wanted to have it more self-similar. So we made it in the end like two intersecting ovals that were slightly offset also, to really allow the mutant character to incorporate not only intersections on the inside, but to also allow exterior spaces to appear. So here you see the fitness center as it sits next to the stadium. It's actually kind of one building in a weird way, as in the practice areas are there. And what was also really important for this hybrid is that it was super adaptable. We made it super adaptable by introducing something called the suspendome, which means it's a roof that has an extreme height in the middle and then self-spans itself to the inner walls and cantilevers out to the outer bowl. So this is a cantilever, and that carries one of the rings. So the two rings of these intersections was a closed facade clad in brass shingles, and then a glass die-grid facade, steel and glass. That was the other circle. So here we are kind of foundation phase. We are on site looking at the projects. What was really interesting is that we had to actually take a car to drive from one project to another. We saw the buildings in several visits till about halfway up, and then COVID hit. Here we are. So what was amazing about COVID is that the BIM guy from the contractor contacted us. This is the guy here in the middle. And he had found that he really loved the buildings and had never seen anything like it, and was trying to understand it and had some questions. And basically around his boss, I think, contacted us. And so we had these meetings with him discussing how to make this intersection of the two volumes, how to create the suspendome, which is essentially a radial grid, and how to intersect all structures and mechanical in there. He also helped to prefab the whole thing. So this whole roof of essentially a 350,000 square foot building is lifted in place in only, I think, 8 or 9 chunks like this. And then with tiny little cranes held up in the air while they're being connected. And I have this little movie I wanted to share with you, because the way they did that was quite stunning to us. Is in there they are lifted in the air, but then you see these people literally connecting the dots, as they say, locally at these points. Thornton Tomasetti was our engineer who helped us think through these things, but it also rendered the building completely column-free. So the column-free being important for the flexibility. The die-grid, we were helped by a very famous engineer in New York City called Israel Berger, Bill Logan. He's a sailor. It's my favorite engineer because he thinks dynamically. And I asked him, I want to keep this die-grid planar, because 1, I don't want to make this double curved building super expensive. 2, I think it's more interesting to give the double curved facade a lot of texture, because what started to happen is that the calculations of the brass shingles that we also optimized, I think the 5,000 pieces only in 85 different shapes through parametric design. We also wanted to have the glass facade to have a lot of texture. So as you can see here, we kept the glass planar, but then designed little silver eyelets, triangulated steel profiles that support the glass, which then gives the facade quite a bit of texture. But again, as you see here, because it's so large, these are very small eyelets. But the nice thing is they light up when the sun hits them. So they have a really beautiful shimmer in the facade, and it's very 3D. Of course, the hybrid nature also had to happen in the inside. So we looked at the arena seating, theater seating, and made a hybrid for it. that then we developed under this suspend dome. So here the interior is under construction. There's actually a skylight on the top also to give natural daylight reflected by the circle in the middle, or deflected, I should say. And fresh air also, and the hot air is also allowed to escape. We only have air conditioning under the seats to make the building super efficient. And as I said, the hot air just escapes. So here you start to see it becoming closer to completion. And then the idea is that you can have classical or modern concerts here in the same space by just changing the seating a little bit. And the lighting is already completely ready for this. So the building on the outside, you see these very strange landscapes where there is curved cuts and strange railings and things happening, skylights in the park. On the right, you see here the wetland as it starts to grow. It's wetland vegetation, which filters the water also. This is a view of actually that fitness center again, where you see how the park sits on top and the facade is only visible from the road, and how it intersects. So here you see also the balcony, that the offset of this intersection of the volumes also create a kind of a VIP balcony for during the games, but also with concerts. That's where the bar or the coffee shop will be for the break in the concerts. The beautiful wing in the back. The wing is, we wanted to keep that very low, and that's why we also recessed the stadium, the field hockey stadium, in the landscape. And then, of course, this is incredible. Our photographer took this photo where they're on the fitness center, and this landscaper is keeping up with the grass and the trees. But it feels like you're almost in the middle of nature. So it's really funny to think that actually right below you is a gigantic fitness center with several Olympic-sized pools. So yeah, the book, as you heard, is out. It came out the end of 21. Manuel de Landa was so kind to write a really great text on it. So as I said, it's a manual. It really describes why we think you can innovate in architecture by working through manufacturing and prototyping rather than presentation models and working only with the contractor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winke. It's really a fantastic presentation of projects that lead up to the Asian Games project, and really an incredible, thorough display of all the different aspects of the site and the buildings. The format of these events for people joining us, if you joined us late, or this is the first of series that you've come to, the architect of the project in question gives a presentation followed by a student-led interview. So I'll introduce Damini Srireddy, who will conduct the interview. Thank you, Winke.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Sorry, a little bit louder. I think we need Damini. Sorry, your mic needs to be a little bit louder.
Is this okay? It's very hard to hear you. Oh, I'm so sorry. How about now? Is that okay?
Is your internet connection okay?
Yeah, it's good. Let me try.
It's really hard to hear you.
Do you have microphones in your ears? Because sometimes that's the culprit. Earpods could be. I've had that.
Try again, Damini, please.
Now we don't hear you at all, Damini.
At all. Yeah, we don't hear you at all. Maybe take out the earphones and try again. Yeah, you can try that. You can try calling in by Zoom on the phone. Apologies, everybody, and Winka for this.
Don't worry.
We didn't expect this.
This
Since we're
is
on Zoom, we sort of normally we're in our classroom, but I've been remote for a week for some other personal reasons, so we are distributed today, and have a bit of an internet problem possibly. Okay, so Damini, you're in. Let's give a test.
Hi, I'm sorry. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Oh, that's so much better. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about that. I had to dial in with my phone to get connected. I hope I'm audible now. I'm sorry for the issue. Yeah. Again, thank you for your presentation. Again, sorry. Again, my name is Damini, and I would like to again thank you for your thorough and comprehensive and enlightening presentation here with us today. I'd like to ask my question now. The Hangzhou Asian Games Park for 2022 Asian Games is the largest project ever undertaken and completed by Architectonics. As you have presented, this project comprises a vast master plan with the integration of 7 buildings for Asian Games and the Valley Mall, a submerged shopping mall. The complexity of this project necessitated the use of building information modeling, BIM, for optimization and the integration of information from all consultants to be consolidated into central model for consultants to work on, but also importantly for the possibility of the project to be managed remotely at a great distance. So to recap, this project was designed and built during the context of COVID-19 within a tight schedule for competition for the Asian Games. And during a time in which there was a travel ban, prohibited travel to China during this time. Architects have for long before these technologies saw clients and projects far away due to economic necessities and opportunities present to internationally recognized architects. The use of BIM seems to facilitate a new expanded remoteness of a design team, yet with an increased integration of consultants' informations to be coordinated. Can you tell us about your experience of working remotely on this project with the use of BIM, especially given the travel ban, and also how your practice might be now in a position to work anywhere?
Yeah, no, I mean, we always, as we know, nothing was, as you said, actually, there was a lot of international. We built several things in China, London, Paris, Holland before, without any Zoom or whatever. So we could do it. But what was interesting about doing this when we halfway actually had to switch was that we realized, for example, if I had, as you saw the small, tiny people in front of the stadium, let's say you're trying to inspect this stadium and you're standing in the grass or in the mud in front of it, you would never be able to see the top of the building or the top of the structure or in between the building and the structure, because that roof actually doesn't touch the building. It has its own concrete feet, let's say, and then it's free above the building. So interesting is that through our architect there would do drone visits in their daytime, which is our nighttime. And then the next day we would have the drone footage of each building being circled and could stop obviously the movie at any point, investigate a detail. And then if we thought there was something super tricky going on, we could ask the guy to go back or call the contractor and say, or actually Zoom with the contractor and say, hey, could you look at this detail? Now, talking about BIM is interesting, but obviously BIM doesn't start, right? Like you start with designing everything 3D in just simple Maya and Rhino. That is how we started. And then we just gave that model. And this is something we do. I mean, a lot of people, I guess, charge for it, but we gave the model to the contractor and said, you can use this for your BIM. Now, the benefit being that's then what suddenly becomes the norm. And that is what they're building. So, and that also was really interesting because by sheer coincidence, we had a very young guy that was in charge of that and that just loved architecture. So he was fascinated by the building. If he had problems, he would call us, not his boss, and we would work out details with him over Zoom. So that was just one of those things. You meet a person that loves your building and what took the trouble of finding us, calling us, and working with us through it. It's shocking how precise they've built these buildings and how precise they followed all our drawings. So in that sense, I think the combination, what we will definitely keep, and it is not so much for the distance, it's just for the scale of the building, is the idea that with a drone, you can circle the building and actually really in your own time, go back to that movie and inspect the building at all levels, at every height. Is extremely informative, and we will definitely keep doing, because that was, I realized if we had stood there, you know, having to drive with a car from the building to the building, we would just not have time long enough on site. We would have to move in for a month to see everything. I'm still super impressed with the contractor, how they coordinated the whole thing, because they had 300 workers on site every day. And in COVID would take the 300 workers on for 2 weeks, give them off for 2 weeks to see whether they had COVID, and bring on another team in the meantime for 2 weeks. So there were 2 teams of 300. There were 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So, I mean, and they did that because we won only in May 2018, and the games were supposed to open in September 2022. So that means the buildings had to be done in the start of that year, so they could still build out the interiors, the lighting, the air conditioning, test all the facilities. So actually the buildings were done May 2022. And then the interiors were built over the summer. And so we were ready for September 2022, and then they postponed it for a year. So, but yeah, the park in the meantime has been super popular and inundated with little tents. So it's been very funny to see what we were hoping was really for the city, rather than having it first being for the game and then being opened for the city. Through COVID, it's become first the city. And even the building, the concert hybrid stadium, was already several times open for big events. I think New Year's, they had 2,500 students and faculty members celebrating New Year's in there. And they had the lighting being like very star-shaped on the roof. It was hilarious. So yeah, they're really playing around with them. And it makes me very happy because, you know, it's not only the carbon footprint, of course, that's important, but also just to have a building that is really for the neighborhood and not just a dead white elephant.
In your presentation and also in few recent publications of the project in the architecture press have highlighted the risk of these kind of short-term sporting events, also including the Olympics becoming a white elephant, facilities which become unused, costly to maintain, disruptive in the city's fabric. In our MR course with Professor Verbes at NYIT, we had discussed in our relation to your project the problem of obsolescence, dysfunctionality, and decay of architecture and cities over time, and possible strategies with which to future-proof an architectural or an urban design project. We are keen to know more about how you developed the Asian Games project to be integrated into the city to remain an active urban landscape territory with thriving buildings and facilities which will accommodate a range of future uses, needs, and desires. Your thesis focuses on the adaptability of hybrid buildings, which are defined as multi-purpose and are transformable between sports and music and performing arts uses. Was the strategy of future-proofing via the principle of hybrid buildings part of the criteria stated in the competition brief, or was this a proposition for the hybridity of use in two stadia, in particular part of architectonics proposal?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The government, our client is the national government. The government only stipulated what they call a sponge city. So they wanted the park to be sustainable and had very strict rules of porous pavement. We added the restoration of the wetlands. We also did a major study in local vegetation to bring back the local birds and the insects to restore the local biome. So that park idea they started with, and we kind of accelerated just a little bit. Then when we started talking about the buildings, we realized the whole plan has LEED Platinum. And if, for example, the question of an underground shopping mall, which is always coming up in China, as Tom knows, we realize it's just not very sustainable, right? You need artificial light, artificial air, artificial everything. So that's the opposite of sustainable. So that's when we started thinking of this valley, because the valley has natural shading, and it has solar air energy wings. The pavilions have little grass heads, green roofs. Most of the shops are actually under the edges, right, of the valley. And there's whole like cinemas back there. But the beauty of it is that it has natural air, natural light, and solar in the evening. So when we started that idea, then we thought we should make all the buildings also hybrids, because one, it allowed us to make better buildings, so get more durable materials in, make it more beautiful. And funny enough is that because of the suspend dome and the diagrid and the building being column free, we saved 1,130 tons of steel, which is insane to think about. But you saw the matchstick roof, right? It's so thin. So that roof is really carrying both the facade, the glass facades, and spanning the whole building. So it is an incredibly efficient, very lightweight structure. The planar glass with the fins saved $2 million on just the facade. And of course, it's much easier to maintain. Brass shingles naturally age. So those we don't have to maintain. You don't have to. So the whole building doesn't need painting or anything, just washing once in a while. So by making them hybrids, we were and sustainable, we were thinking the chance of them surviving and being instrumental for the neighborhood would be much larger. And also because we felt if the park is really something for the people, we should make the buildings also for the people. And the client loved it. I mean, I have to say, it took very little convincing. And what was actually the most difficult point in the whole process was when they looked under the street there where we wanted to make the Valley Village. They found a 3-meter, which is a 10-foot diameter plumbing pipe. That was the main drain for the whole city. And they're like, well, you'll have to go under that. So you know that any tunnel or anything that you go through has to be passed also by fire trucks. So you always need your 15 feet clearance. So we were already testing. We just went 3 meters, like 10 feet deeper. The slope was just about doable. We had to make it a little longer. We were trying to do renderings where the pipe looked pretty. You can imagine it was not that easy. So we came back and we had all that with us. And then they're like, well, we have good news and bad news. What do you want to hear? I was like, of course, I want to hear the good news. And they're like, well, we got rid of the drain pipe. I couldn't believe it. I mean, because that was the thing they said, we cannot get rid of it. You have to think of a solution. So that's why we worked on it really hard. And then we came back and the pipe was gone. So that was impressive. I mean, I don't know where it went. I didn't ask. I was like, it's fine. It's gone. But yeah, that was definitely an amazing moment, because for a moment I thought, oh, if this whole Valley Village can't happen. It was kind of the core idea for our connectivity and the beauty of the site. No? So yeah, that was important.
Architecture and urban design commissions commonly demand finality and completion of the project. the notion of digital twin at both the building and city scale carve out a scope of work for architects and urban designers to be commissioned to work in the post-occupancy stage of a project on maintenance and future changes. In generic terms, can you elaborate on the problems of obsolescence and dysfunctionality over time, and how this experience of proposing hybrid buildings can help to conceive the design of future of an architectural and urban project?
Well, I think hybrids are interesting because they're not just undesigned buildings. You know, in the past, we used to think that a building, if it was multifunctional, had to look like a factory hall. Right. And that was kind of the non-design version. And that was cool for a while. What I realized when I was working on this was that is still then a one-liner, right? So it still doesn't entice or change our behavior. I'm interested in how architecture can change also human behavior, how we can be seduced to do other things. So by creating a redundancy of stairs and ramps and flying things through these like 6-story high voids, I was able to create upper lobbies, lower lobbies, possible future areas for the theater to have drinks, concession stands, and all these kind of things. So the building has very surprising, rotating public areas that end up suddenly sometimes outside on a VRB terrace or in a little bar, or you can rotate all the way down also into the lower levels where the VIP areas are with their own entrances. So there is a fluidity in the building because of the fact that it is a complex geometry that is column free and that has kind of these desks. Sort of, we call them wobbly discs. The building is also completely asymmetric, by the way. It's not, you know, it looks like for a moment symmetrical, and then you start to look and you realize that things are just rotating. But yeah, so that was the fun part of thinking of a hybrid as a complex geometry rather than as a something that is so simple that it is, of course, adaptable, but then it doesn't seduce you or entice you to act differently or look at things differently. And we thought that was more interesting. And also, I think, you know, the idea that a building is an organism as much as we are, so that a building is closer to you just because it acts more like you is an interesting notion.
In our seminar, we have discussed the paradigm of temporal adaptability and how to design for change within the larger scope of urban territories, as well as how buildings are adapted and reused along their lifespan. So how can the hybridity of programming, or in other words, the transformability of a building for multiple use at different times, potentially inform a more holistic approach to planning architectural methods to deal with the variability, future flexibility, future proofing, and changing the context, needs, and demands of the building environment? Or as more correctly, how does the Asian Games project and its thesis on adaptability and future proofing suggest a more general mode of evolutionary changes for architecture and urban design?
Well, I think, you know, we are all going to face some serious challenges, right? Like the nature is my little slide with burning fields, or what was it? Tornado with a fire combined or something. I mean, it is just crazy making, right? What's happening? We have tennis balls of ice falling down the sky. I mean, there is so many weird things happening in nature that I think the fact that we wouldn't think about it is alien, right? If we wouldn't think of hybrids, or we wouldn't think of these landscapes as eco parks that start to absorb the water that we can't absorb with our cities, that the water is being filtered by the wetlands and the river. We put little islands in the river to speed up the water, so it actually has to be filtered, and put some plants in there that also clean the water. So to just really, but also to see that as an educational moment for the neighborhood, and that you make it so beautiful that they don't pollute it, that they don't put plastic in it, that they don't kill it, right? That they actually love it and take care of it. And it's very funny, as much as they camp in it, they're also maintaining the plants. You know, we find people that are not even locally hired by the government maintaining the plants. They're just local people that just start picking stuff up and start taking care of it. And I think if you are able to somehow talk to people about beauty and restoring their local biome, not you importing weird stuff from the outside, I think it touches people in a weird way differently than when architecture is just an abstract entity and gets thrown on top of them. So I do think, by the way, the stadium does look a little bit like an alien coming from Mars. But the funny thing is that we found a few times people writing about it in the newspapers, and they have stated that this is now their favorite spot to take selfies in China, which we're very proud of course. So yeah, it's very funny. So there is 1 million selfies with the little golden thing behind them. So, or not so little. But yeah, it's I am proud of that, because I love the fact that people appropriate it and that they feel they identify with it, although it's such an alien, right? It is a bit of a radical mutant, but yeah.
Shifting our discussion towards the concept of Asian Games Park as an eco-village, there are a number of architectural systems which are driven by agendas of resilience and sustainability. Perhaps the most substantial ecological move in the project is the urban sponge, which you claim acts as an absorptive lung which collects, filters, reuses stormwater runoff. In developing design of the low-lying master plan, comprising the absorptive green spaces, wetlands, and water catchments and hardscapes, we can quote you in publications of the project how architectonics, as the architect, had worked on equal terms with the landscape architect's milk. Can I ask you what you can highlight as a limitation of the discipline and professional scope of architecture? Or in other words, what is the position of the architect in multidisciplinary design teams on a large site with so many ecological and hydrological challenges?
Yeah, so traditionally, the architect is the one that initiates it and then has a bunch of engineers and consultants below them, right? It's a bit of a pyramid. But as this project was so large and the time was so short and the pressure was so enormous, I sat down with my business partner at Architectonics and I said to him, I had sort of an epiphany, you know, how many large competitions can you do and not win? So I said to him, we can do the same thing all over again and get the same result. Or what about we ask the structural engineer and the landscape architect to be equal partners? So we put them next to us. And we also paid them, which in a normal competition, if you do a competition, as Tom knows, typically you have some advisors, but you don't really hire them. The client has their local engineers, so they take over. And typically the engineers get paid very little or nothing at all. So we changed that because we wanted to, and we felt that also otherwise it was too complex. So we made them equal partners, and we also paid for their fees that we asked them in advance. We said, listen, and I also said to my business partner, listen, if we lose a lot of money because we're going to split this fee that is already not ginormous. We're going to split it in 3 equal parts, right? So that's something we have to do. So he was fully on board with it, and we did. And then we asked the engineers to give the fee to us, that if we won, what their fee would be, so that they also felt they could invest in this completely with us. And they did. I mean, they did an enormous amount of work. We had the most complex project, but we came with fully engineered structures. So Thornton Tomasetti went above and beyond. We had that wing engineered, we had that suspendome engineered, and calculated numbers, right? Like literally calculated, which never happens. But we did that because, you know, in China, you win a competition, you have to have SD, which is schematic design, done. And you get, I don't know, what we had, 6 weeks maybe for that whole thing. So the pressure was on, and Melk was fantastic. So we really developed the whole master plan together with Melk. We're both Dutch, so we both came up with that valley in the same day, which is hilarious. We on the phone call, we're having a coffee together, Jerry and I, and we're just brainstorming on it. And we both said at the same time, let's do Yes, and it was very funny because it's actually based, the idea was inspired by, there is a shopping valley in Rotterdam that is called the Koopgoot in Dutch, shopping valley, let's say. And we both said we should translate that into a green valley and just make that connect the thing. And ultimately, I think the reason why we won was not because we had such a complex design, because that probably scared the hell out of him, because they had to build it in 3 years, 7 buildings in that park. But we won because they loved the fact that we pulled the stadiums aside, and that we had the valley. And then because we pulled the stadiums aside, one of the stadiums ended up in the district of the big boss. So that was also very coincidental. We didn't know that, but yeah. So it was a bunch of really strange factors that the most complex scheme, which usually doesn't happen, won. But yeah, that was partially because we collaborated on equal terms with the engineer and the landscape people.
As a consequence of Asian Games project in more broad terms, can you summarize the status of landscape architecture, landscape urbanism, or environmental planning to address the urgencies of climate change? Or do you think is architecture as a profession complicit in the acceleration of climate change? Do you believe it may be possible to reshape our modes of practice in architecture to extend the genuinely work towards the mitigation of climate change effects on our planet?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really difficult question, right? Like, I mean, we have had serious periods with social unrest, and then people go like, architecture should solve it. I don't think architecture solves problems. I think architects' attitude can help solve problems. Like, be more than an architect, be a thinker, be a partner, be a collaborator, be a person that does research, not only design, and focus your designs on some serious facts. We tend to think that green doesn't mean that the buildings have to be super neutral. We always think that the architect's best tool is still design, and that within that design, you can be sustainable, you can be energy efficient, you can be saving money and saving resources, as we did with Asian Games, and that kind of innovation is the most important. So not to give up on complex shapes that are actually enriching our lives, but to be smarter and faster and more engaged. Right? Like, that's probably the best word. Really go with your feet in the mud and take care of it. And I think that is going to be an attitude we all have to take. It's not going to be sitting behind our desks in a pretty suit, directing people around. It's going to be getting your hand and feet dirty and work on it in teams, in big teams. So I think we need all these people you just mentioned, not just the architects.
Earlier, we had discussed hybrids as a programmatic concept. Can you elaborate on your thesis about the blurring of distinction of the categories of the natural and synthetic in how architecture and urbanism can manifest mutations or other more strange hybrids between the presumed defunct polarities of the wild and the cultural?
Yeah, I mean, that's a super interesting question, right? But we could say that anything that is natural in that park or in any park is already synthetic, because one, we've designed it, we've planned it, we put it on roofs that are floating above gigantic buildings, we have dug it down and going under a river and under a road. The river is an aqueduct. I mean, nature is synthetic almost everywhere in the world by now, because we have influenced it. And that's why we are in the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, that means basically that everything that is going on this globe is impacted mostly by us human beings, right? So for better and for worse, we are in a synthetic nature. And then the question becomes, how do you make the natural of the synthetic better? And how do you make the synthetic more interesting? So, and that is, I think, really important. So for example, our research right now is to make buildings or to start to work on buildings that absorb carbon, that produce oxygen, right? That take maybe natural components which we mix with structural components so that our buildings become both structural and plant-like. And not by building traditional buildings and putting a plant on top of it. So the kind of hybrid, and you could call that a synthetic nature, right? Like that the building itself becomes plant-like, the material becomes plant-like. So this is what we're doing a lot of research on now, because we think that, you know, the construction and households and buildings alone is 50% of the carbon footprint. So to answer your earlier question, you know, we can change 50% of the carbon footprint by just changing how we build things. Or whether we build things at all, you know, whether we rebuild old things and just take that frozen carbon footprint, don't put new carbon footprint, and just consolidate it and improve it. So I think we have some really interesting possibilities, but it takes a fast acceleration, I think, of thinking if we want to go anywhere, because otherwise we all are doomed. And not to end on a very negative note, but it is not going well. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Focusing now on the largest and perhaps most complex building, the table tennis stadium. We are interested in how the concept was developed from the Chong, a jade artifact with cultural relevance to the locality of Hangzhou. In which ways did the composite geometry of hardline, square figure, and the curvilinear figures of this artifact become instrumentalized in designing of the stadium? Or how was Chong applied as a geometrical diagram in generating the form of a tennis stadium?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about that. So essentially, we were interested in the idea of the geometrical idea of intersection to kind of start to study newfound areas in the building that would not be otherwise there, right? To kind of accelerate the idea of hybridity. When we started looking at intersections, funny enough, when I searched for it in that site or in the area, I found that thing, the Chong. And what I liked about it is that no one really knew what it was. It was important, but they didn't quite know what it was. And they found a lot in graves with, you know, beautiful engravings, and it's a gorgeous stone object, but it has mystery. And I like the idea that it had complexity and mystery. So I was thinking that is more or less what I want for the building. So I started thinking how we could use intersection as a tool to start to think of a much more easy adaptable building. And initially did look at the intersection of a square and a circle, and then realized the form had to be more self-similar if it really wanted to be mysterious. Otherwise, it still became too much one. The binary thing, it wasn't, you couldn't erase it. And I didn't want a binary building. I wanted one building with a level of complexity. So that's when we went towards the two shapes of both ellipses. So yeah, and then they're both bulging. So it's a bunch of bulging discs.
The materiality of the table tennis stadium is varied and pluralistic. Among other materials, the palette includes a curved glass diagram and solid brush shingles of the external envelope, as well as the curved shell of the inner arena in bamboo. Can you comment on the cultural significance of specific of these materials, and how did you decide upon this material palette? Were there any cultural and ecological criteria, material availability, and what may be the possible constructional in Hangzhou, China?
Yeah, well, bamboo, it's a bamboo forest, right? That area is known as has a huge bamboo forest. So it's a very good renewable material. Both interiors for both stadiums are made of the bamboo. It's also a beautiful contrast with something that's very large. It's a good way to make it warm and kind of a soft texture. So that was an easy choice. Renewable and beautiful is always a good combination. The brass shingles was because I wanted something that aged beautifully, and they're not solid brass. Obviously, it's a hybrid, or yeah, what do you call it? It's hybrid material, so it's layers of recycled metals, and then the brass is a very thin top layer on top of it. But the beauty of that was that the shingles, because shingles you can very easily manipulate on a double curved surface, right? So, and it's unusual. So I was thinking of how the facade should be super textured, so it feels really like a natural, kind of like fish scale like configuration for the skin. So I looked actually at fish scales for the glass. That's when it occurred to me I should have planar glass and eyelids. But yeah, so these things happen kind of, but when you start to think of a building that has to be maintenance free, you're looking at local references, you're looking at renewable materials, things that are hybrids already. The beautiful thing of hybrid materials like the brass shingles as a composite is that they have multiple qualities. So the bottom layer of the metal is really strong. The brass is really beautiful, as in the sense that it ages. So you get the composite materials have multiple qualities rather than just one. It's also much more affordable. The durability is huge. So yeah, you basically just, design is that, right? Like for us, it is finding ways to make really beautiful things that are still super affordable, but sometimes by thinking a little longer, they also become way more interesting, right? So it's kind of a fun game to play. But yeah, I mean, we were definitely amazed that we won, believe me. After the proposal was pretty complex.
Let's discuss ecological building systems. Aside from the ecological infrastructure of the urban sponge and zero earth strategy, the building in this project boasts ecological cooling system, natural ventilation, green roofs, and other systems. Did the competition documents call for specific ecological systems, or did you make these proposals based on your values and obligation as an architect to work ethically with respect to the enhancement of environmental performance of architecture?
No, they wanted LEED Platinum, right? So the idea that it was sustainable came from the client. We found that it was quite easy first to dig a wetland that was kind of immediately enhancing their stormwater requirement, but then had cooling water for my stadium. So, I mean, in architecture, you have to be optimistic and opportunistic in the same time. So by digging out a wetland, we answered that question for a sponge city, but then allowed us to use the cooling water to chill the stadium. Then by only chilling the seats of the visitors and to use the building as breathing, so the hot air is pulled out and the cool air is let in, we were able to make that a quite or completely sustainable building, which is quite peculiar, but by just thinking, maybe not separating the system of the park with the system of the building. So we kind of used the fact that we had a lot of nature around it to help cool buildings. Solar wings for the valley village, because if you make a valley, it's really important that it's always lit. Otherwise it's dangerous, no? So it has to be lit. So how do you entice them to have the electricity on all the time? Produce the electricity. So these kind of things are like maybe not that obvious, but they're obvious when you think a little longer than one step, right? And that's what I mean with, we all have to start thinking harder and be more engaged and try and solve problems before they're asked from us. We were not asked any of this except for that it had to be LEED Platinum. So some, of course, was driven by that, but a lot of it was also just having fun with it and thinking we can, right? Not that difficult.
In our analysis of the architectural project in the Asian Games Park, we were taken aback by how the but how the BIM processes used in this project enable the design of lightweight steel, long-span wing roof structure of the stadia to save a huge quantity of material, mass, and money. Working with the engineers Totten Tomasetti, the suspended dome is a composite ultra lightweight structure with a synthetic translucent polyurethane skin. Can I ask you, how will you take this experience of saving so much materials to further projects? Does the possibility of saving so much material point towards a more general theory and practice of minimizing the use of quantities of materials in architectural projects? Can we call this process a product as a computational lightweight structure?
Well, we've always done that, right? Like when we did the first folded glass facade in 497 Greenwich, which was the end of the 90s. I mean, we were just about to get digital. I still did that in Form Z. You wouldn't even know what that is. Form Z is an ancient software. And our computers, you know, if we pasted anything, you could go shopping. By the time it was done, you could have filled your closet and your fridge. And then you would come back and go save and hope it wouldn't crash. So we were doing this in a time when computation was so early, and we were one of the first ones to do it all in 3D. So, you know, even that curtain wall, when I send it off to standard curtain wall companies, I would go, this is 90% standard and it's 10% anomaly. So I want the price to be 90% standard and 10% anomaly. And of course, they made the whole thing 300% more. So that was very difficult to work with. And so finally, I thought, I'm going to make it custom. And this is when I met this engineer, Bill Logan, and I explained the problem. And he said, oh, it should be easy. And so the weird thing is, even in that curtain wall, we saved a ton of material. We built it cheaper than a standard curtain wall. And it was folded glass in Barcelona, double glazing, extruded mullions in Hong Kong, and the whole thing was put together in Brooklyn and then moved to the site. So, I mean, this was like when it occurred to me that it's possible to make really beautiful things if you just think a little longer and you work with manufacturers and you don't think of standardization. You know, honestly, standardization is expensive at this point. So then you might as well make it custom and fun. So I have left the world of standardization since the 90s and just think of it as custom. And the funny thing is, we build buildings cheaper than other people. They look expensive, however. So people still think I'm an expensive architect, but our buildings are actually cheaper than the straight up and down ones next door. But that's you know, that's because there's a lot of stigmas in construction and in development. But yeah, it's an interesting world, that world. And I wouldn't want to go back to where I was. I really love designing things and just trying to be smarter than the standard. And that's honestly not that hard. You know, it's not that hard to make something better than what you can buy. But yeah, and it makes the building more like a piece of furniture, right? It's like you design it, you prototype it, and you then build it. And the only difference is, in our case, the prototype is the building. So yeah.
What are the options for materiality and structural systems were considered in the design stages with Totten Tomasetti? Please share with us how you arrived at this structural and material solution.
It's a brainstorm, you know, because they were there from the beginning. I kept saying to them, I don't want columns, I don't want columns. And then they first developed the building, the roof. They developed with the idea of the suspend dome, but they had it sitting on the outer walls. And that made the outer walls quite heavy. And since I wanted a diagrid with glass without any columns, I asked them eventually, can we sit it on the inner dome? And that was kind of a breakthrough, because at that point we could cantilever it out and really make it like almost like a mushroom, right? You have a strong center, and then you cantilever out and the light stuff hangs from the edges. So that was, so it really was a collaboration. They came up with a super beautiful roof, and we had the idea of maybe sitting it on the inner dome rather than the outer dome, which made it even lighter. But yeah, that was so, I mean, it was also a bunch of super fun people, you know, it's like it went so fast, that design phase, that honestly, yeah, if I think back who did exactly what, it's a kind of a blur, but that's more or less how it went. By the
Our
way,
next-
I have to go teaching, dear, in like 2 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. My students are waiting.
Damini, maybe then we'll, if you skip, there's just a couple of questions.
Yeah, you want to do them quickly? Something
Yeah.
I can answer quickly?
Yes. Further to your presentation, can you share with us the genealogy of the design of Asian Games project with the bodywork of architectonics? Are there projects which led to this project as earlier prototypes which you had developed further?
Oh, that's super cute. Yeah. So I have given that lecture on that small, the reason why I stopped. Originally, I was doing the same as every other architect, small projects first, larger projects, right? That changed in 2008 because of the financial crisis. All the big projects were still going, but there were only small projects coming in. And what I realized and learned in that period is that it's actually super interesting because the smaller projects are a great laboratory for the bigger projects. So, for example, I would have probably never thought of what I was doing with the hybrid stadium if I hadn't just built the Inscape meditation dome that we prototyped one-to-one in California with a car designer. Was thinking about these rotational grids and grid shells, and was amazed how large a span you could make, because this dome, it looks always small in these drawings, but they're like, I think it is a dome for 45 people. It's 27 feet on the smallest dimension. So yeah, that's where this thinking started of that, and also the idea of integrating bamboo, as there it's both the seating, the grid shell, and the floor. They had amazing acoustic properties because it's not a circle, it's an ellipse, so the sound deflects differently. That was the smallest project with the biggest amount of problems, because we actually had acoustics done by over Arab, because it gets really hard to make something perfect acoustically. And we had incredible lighting people and sound engineers, and the client was unbelievably interesting. So super, super, super anal and really precise. And so we got like the best of everything. And that was incredibly fun. So it was a tiny project, but very inspirational and very inventive, and worked with great people. So yeah, we use a lot of the smaller projects as the laboratory for our bigger projects.
This project is perhaps the most recently completed of all the 21 projects in the Beyond the Envelope series covered by 21 to 23. Completed in 2022, it may be hard to map the Asian Games project influence on your practice's future work. But can you please share with us how you can forecast the influence of Asian Games project, both as a master plan as well as a series of buildings upon current and future works of architectonics? In other ways, can you speculate the future consequences of this project and its impact on your practice?
Well, what I'm really interested in is kind of the idea that cities grow bottom up, which means that there is a set of acupunctures you do on a city, and that allows for economic, cultural, social, and urban growth. So not just urban growth or more architecture, but that the idea is not that you build and design something, but that you cause growth on multiple levels. We worked on that in Bogota, and when I was doing this park, that's why I thought of a lot of these things, because I thought this is a really great way of thinking of this park as a social condenser for the city that it really needs. And what is funny is to see, I didn't show you the photos where the park is just taken over by little tents. It's insane. I don't know how the grass is doing, but it's looking a little challenging. But what is beautiful there is something that I think we will work on more, is I think two things. One is on urban level, how it's a bottom-up system, and on architectural level, what I said earlier is how we can make buildings that reduce the 50% carbon footprint by becoming plant-like the building itself. So the building has synthetic nature is what we're really interested in. So those two things are mostly interesting right now.
This interview and the study of the set of projects in the Beyond the Envelope series of presentations and interviews are set within the Masters of Architecture course here at NYIT. As such, our audience in this event and this interview are future architects. In this context, can you please share with us, from your point of view, any advice you might have for the next generation of architects?
That's what I tell our students. I can share that with you. Yes. I think you need to think of your, while you're studying, you need to think of the next 25 years. So not be afraid if your professors push you far and wide, just go for it, because I think the future for all of you lies into being actively engaged into all the things that we're going to meet, and to still understand that architecture itself has our biggest tool is design. So never give up on design, but make it smarter, more intelligent, more rigorous, and more productive or operational.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I personally admire the Hangzhou project. And thank you so much for the special opportunity to interview today and for your enlightening presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for having me, and thank you for the great questions. Very intense.
Thank you very much, Winke. Sorry for the intensity. Your presentation was absolutely fabulous. And thanks for your generosity with your time to join us.
Of course. See you soon.
All the best. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.